The PCB Editor SKILL API includes a set of axlDBCreate functions that are used to add new elements to the PCB Editor database. Most of the axlDBCreate functions return a list of 2 elements when successful. The first element of the return value is a list of all the elements that were added to the database by the function call, and the second element of the return value is either a T or a nil, to indicate if a DRC error was created by the addition of the new element or elements. The most common element that I add to a PCB Editor database are connect-line segments. So let's look at the axlDBCreateLine function. There are about half a dozen parameters that can be used with the axlDBCreateLine function, so I usually look up the syntax of the function in the documentation. The first argument to the axlDBCreateLine function is a list of XY locations for the endpoints of the line segments to be added. The rest of the arguments are optional, and the second argument is the width of the line to add, which will default to 0 if you do not include the width. The third argument is the layer to add the line to, which is a string in the form of class/subclass for the line. The fourth through sixth optional arguments are not used too often. The fourth is a string with the net name of the line to add, which is not as useful as it sounds, and we'll talk more about this in a little while. The fifth argument is an optional parent dbid, and would allow you to associate the line segment with a package symbol instance if required. The sixth argument can be a line font symbol of solid, hidden, phantom, dotted, or center, with solid being the default, and the only option available for connect line segments. By default, the axlDBCreateLine function will add line segments on non-etch layers and see line segments on etch layers. When the axlDBCreateLine function cannot add the segment to the database, the function will return nil rather than an error. When we enter our axlDBCreateLine function, we should notice a couple of things about the return value. It is a list of 2 items as indicated in the documentation, and the first item is a list, even though there is only 1 item in the list. So if we want the dbid of the item added, we need to use the char or the nth function twice. The first time gives us the list of items added, and the second time gives us the first item in the list of items added, and now we can use the --greater-than layer operator to see that our line was added on the layer we requested. We can also see that the second item in our return value is a T, to indicate that a DRC error was created, and we can see our DRC marker as well. When Skill adds items to the PCB Editor database, it is using the standard constraint system. So, if you had disabled online DRC checking in the PCB Editor, then the second item in our return value would have been nil, to indicate that no DRC error was generated, even though our function call was exactly the same. Elements added through the Skill API will always respect the PCB Editor connectivity model as well. The PCB Editor connectivity model dictates that the net name of a connect line is dynamic, so the net name will automatically change to the pins or shapes that the connect line eventually connects to. Notice in our example, we indicated that we wanted the connect line segment added to the net GND through the user interface and through the dbid that was added. We can see that the new connect line is actually on the Q2 net rather than the GND net, and since the C line also hits a pin on the A net, the DRC error is produced. The PCB Editor connectivity model cannot be turned off, so including a net name with the axlDBCreateLine function is rarely useful. In summary, the PCB Editor SKILL API includes a set of axlDBCreate functions that are used to add new elements to the PCB Editor database. Most of the axlDBCreate functions return a list of 2 elements when successful. The first element of the return value is a list of all the elements that were added to the database by the function call. The second element of the return value is either T or nil, to indicate if a DRC error was created by the addition of the new elements.